Hello, my name is Greg Massey, and this is episode number 71 of The Color of Air, a podcast about the musical journey. Thanks again for tuning in. As I said on the last podcast, episode 70, I'm going to be taking kind of a hiatus from the podcast for I'm not sure how long, but just with so much going on, it's, I'm just not going to have the ability to find the time to get interviews and do all the editing and all the other stuff that goes into it. But I do want to, again, stress how much I enjoy the people who have, commented or rated it or listened or gotten in touch. I really appreciate everyone who's listened. And so, before I go on hiatus, I have this episode with my interview with Jason Walton. Jason Walton, a lot of you probably know from the bands Agalloch and Sculptured. And I finally had a chance to schedule something with him to talk, and I'm super excited. It really was a great conversation. Jason is a really good dude. And in addition to that, he's just a really brilliant and talented musician as well. And, he's got a number of different side projects. I shouldn't even call them side projects. He just has a number of projects. And I highly recommend you go to his Bandcamp to check them out. And, I hope you enjoy this interview. Don't really have much else to add in this intro other than thank you again for listening. Thanks to Jason Walton for an awesome interview, and I really hope you enjoy it. And to start you off with, here is a track from his project Self Spiller, and this song is called Rot en Route. Well, thank you for taking the time to do this.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, I'll start. This is the way I was like, what's a good kind of opening question or thing? But I just want to relate this story to you, and maybe I just want to get your take on it because you're on the other side of it.
Great. Love it.
Is I felt that in when Maudlin first came out in like 99 or 2000 or whatever,
Yeah.
I felt like every single review or comment was like, oh, they're just like sculptured.
Yeah.
And
I think I've heard that before.
I didn't know if you guys encountered that as well, because to me I was like, but we don't sound like them. They don't sound like us. We're two totally separate. And
yeah.
And the nearest I could tell, and I think it was Toby who said this, she's like, the only reason they say that is because we both use brass instruments on our records.
Yep. That's exactly right. I think I remember when, I think when Apollo Ends came out, which was around that time. I can't remember exactly.
That was the album. I remember was the Apollo Ends album.
Yeah,
this all started.
Yeah, we definitely got that comparison. Oh, Mile Into the Well, and it's 100% because there's brass instrumentation. People don't know what to do with that, especially in the metal world. But yeah, we definitely got compared to you guys quite a bit. My favorite Sculptured comparison was Cake mixed with Morbid Angel. And I don't remember who said that, but I feel like it was in Melomaniacs or something. But it's really indicative of what we're talking about. I mean, we have nothing in common with Cake whatsoever. It's just people don't know what to say when there's brass instrumentation on a metal record. So yeah, it's Model in the Well or Cake or maybe Sear Bliss or Beyond Dawn. That's about it. So, it's people are grasping at straws all the time to describe things. But yeah, we definitely got the Model in the Well stuff. I've actually talked with Toby at length about Model in the Well. Because I seem to be in the minority where I never really heard Model in the Well. Like, I mean, a little bit here and there. And like still to this day, I haven't really checked it out. I've been a massive Chaodot fan since Choirs of the Eye. But for some reason, I've just never taken the time to delve into Model in the Well. I've heard the records, but maybe like once, and that's it. And when I first told Toby this a few years ago, he was kind of gobsmacked. He's like, that's so not what I expected to hear from you. And I'm like, I don't know why, man. It's like, just, it's not like I don't like it or anything. I just haven't taken the time. I'm such a Chaodot nut. I'm just focused on Chaodot.
Right.
He's like, that's weird. He's like, that's not what I hear from people, like, ever.
It's true. I mean, yeah. I mean, well, I will say too, conversely, and, I'll say this. I never really listened much to Sculptured and Agalloch as much. Like I was pretty late to the game on all of it. So
yeah.
And I think it was, especially like, after seeing you in New Hampshire, I'm like, I really need to revisit these things because I like what I've heard, but like, like it, I think with Sculptured, it maybe that the vocals didn't always like jive with me or whatever. Not that again, this is just a musical opinion, has nothing to do with the talent of your collective that I want to ask about. But yeah, I think that was always the thing that kind of like was tough for me. But like listening back to it and giving it a fresh new listen with ears, some 20 years after it came out, I really appreciate what you guys were doing on. I mean, like, I think that again, doesn't sound like Maudlin, but
yeah.
But I think like I appreciated, and then like being able to then kind of like listen to that as compared to Agalloch, as compared to Snares of Sixes and all that other stuff, and seeing just how much talent is in that little pool.
Yeah, we have a nice little collective.
Yeah.
Here, and it's nice because we have the more popular projects like Agalloch or Sculptured, but John has his solo work. I have Snares of Sixes, I have Moonbladder. I mean, I've got way too many projects
I
to
noticed
talk
that on
about.
your Bandcamp, and I tried to keep up.
Yeah, I'm trying to cull them down a little bit now, because it tends to get overwhelming. But I was in Celestial with Tanner for a bit. I guess technically I still am. I've got that ambient project with Andy Whale from Bolt Thrower called Cross Paths. I got Acoustic Doom called Dolvin. A bunch of different projects. But I guess, I don't think it's necessarily unique to us or to this region or anything, but it's just from my perspective, it's been the three of us, it's Don, John, and myself. And then with different friends, we have other projects, and then we start to network and get more projects going. And that's what I really like, is having, like, for a long time, from my point of view, the central figure was Agalloch, with like all these other offshoots and all these other projects. And it's a great way to just push yourself as an artist. And even though Don and I have been in Agalloch since the beginning, it's very much John's vehicle, whereas Sculpture is very much Don's vehicle, and all the crazy noise shit is my vehicle. But it gives us a way to express ourselves in ways that we wouldn't really necessarily want to, like in Agalloch. I've done some electronic stuff for Agalloch, I've done some noise stuff for Agalloch, but it's not a major statement, like a Snares record would be, or something like that. So yeah, it's just a cool scene to be a part of, and the Northwest has a lot of great musicians and a really strong scene.
Well, and I was actually just kind of curious, like how did this kind of because I don't trust Wikipedia to tell me the truth.
Yeah.
But what is kind of the genesis of, like, the three of you that that, and because what I'm getting is it reminds me a little bit of not so much recently, but especially when we were in high school, because it was like the three of us, was me, Toby, and Byron. And each of us had our own kind of individual projects at that point, and then we kind of came together to do one thing. But so, like, how does that come with you, Don and John?
Pretty similarly. John and I grew up in Montana, about an hour apart from each other. He grew up in Butte, I grew up in Bozeman. And like I said, it's about an hour drive from each other. But I was heavily into tape trading in the late 80s, early 90s, and getting zines and things like that. And I just happened to see his name in a zine. It was in a magazine called The Coven Zine. And he did some artwork for the zine and had his address in there, and it said Butte, Montana. And at that point, this was probably 1990, 91, maybe. At that point, in Montana, at least, death metal wasn't something that anybody's ever heard of. It wasn't. I was just shocked that anybody else in Montana listened to death metal. So I wrote him. We started writing back and forth, started calling each other. We finally met, became friends, and then I graduated. We both graduated in '93. Graduated high school, and I moved out to Minneapolis to start a death metal band there. And John moved out to Seattle to go to school. And then John met Don. And John called me up and he says, "You really should talk to this Don guy. This guy is a guitar genius, and he knows all the same stuff that we do, and he's younger." And so then I started talking to Don, and I hated Minneapolis. And so then I was like, I need to get out of here. I need to do something. And Don sent me the first Sculptured demo, Fulfillment and Tragedy, and it was professionally recorded, and it's gorgeous, and it's amazing. And I was like, oh shit, this is next level stuff. And he said, well, I need a bass player. Do you want to come out here? And I was like, yeah. I'd never been to the Northwest, never been to Portland, never met this guy in my life. And I quit my job, sold most of my stuff, and hopped on a bus to Portland, Oregon. And I ended up living with Don and his parents for like 9 months, a year, something like that. And he was still in high school at this point. He was 17, maybe. Mm-hmm. I can't really remember, but it was a really weird thing for me to do. I mean, in retrospect, especially because I was in my early 20s. I moved in with a stranger and his parents. It was really weird. But it was one of the best decisions I ever made. It took me years to get on my feet and to get everything settled. But now I wouldn't change it for anything, And then shortly thereafter, we started writing Pale Folklore and Apollo Ends. And we would go into a room and we would rehearse Pale folklore material, and then we'd rehearse Apollo Ends material. And it was just like such an amazing creative time for us.
Yeah.
And at that point in time, we were very much isolated. We were very much an island. We didn't know anybody in town, really. We didn't hang out with anybody else. And it was a really amazing time. And then obviously from there, it's grown quite a bit. But yeah, it's basically our history and how we all hooked up.
That's awesome. That's really cool. And so coming into it, I mean, it was kind of defined at that point that it was kind of like John was doing, like, brought the Agalloch stuff to the table, Don brought the Sculptured stuff to the table, and you just kind of said, okay, we're just going to work on it all, just, but we're going to keep it separate? Or you didn't think about making like
no no, I mean, Don was very much doing kind of like death human type worship stuff, and John was very much more into European Gothenburg style stuff and Dark Tranquility and things like that. And it was two very different statements that we wanted to make. And since we didn't really know anybody, John was like, well, hey, Don, do you want to play guitar in Agalloch? And hey, Jason, you want to play bass in Agalloch? And then conversely, it was like, hey, like, John, do you want to drum on the Sculptured record? And so just because we didn't know anybody.
Yeah. And
luckily, John at that time was drumming a lot and playing guitar a lot. And so he could handle both of those things. And it just made sense. And, at that time, playing live was never even a thought because we just didn't have the people and we didn't know the people. And so we're just making records.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think it's, to me too, I mean, because you guys are kind of around the same age as us, and so like just thinking about that time frame, the mid to late 90s, and just like I mean, obviously there was like the whole grunge thing that happened, and what happened to like kind of the more metal at that point, and
right.
But the 90s, I think, gave way to obviously the death metal and black metal kind of like really came into their own in that point. And so it seemed like that was the right time for like stuff like you guys were trying to do with Sculptured and Agalloch to come out.
I think so. I mean, at the time we didn't really think too much about it because we were just doing what we wanted to do. And, I mean, obviously we wanted to get a record deal, and obviously we wanted to do all the things that we did do, but it was really just the three of us sitting in John's bedroom or in Don's bedroom, just geeking out about music and writing and playing together. It wasn't like we're thinking like, oh, like this type of music is going to be perfect for this point in time. It was just, we're just writing what we're into.
Yeah.
And we had, a fairly wide variety of influences, and we're just like, let's take a little bit from here and a little bit from here. And like, this is like, we weren't trying to be like original or anything like that. We're just like really trying to do something that we wanted to hear. But it did kind of hit at the right time. And I think especially for our location too, there wasn't a lot of stuff going on in the Northwest at the time. And, it took years for people to understand that we were American. They always thought that we were European. Even when we started playing live and touring, we'd be playing somewhere and they're like, oh, are you from Sweden? It's like, no, we're, Oregon. But yeah, I mean, I do agree. I think it hit at the right time, and but it was just pure luck and coincidence. We were not planning for that at all.
Yeah. It's your story just reminds me like the three guys sitting in one of them's bedroom geeking out about music and writing. It's like, I feel like that's the exact same experience we had in the 90s.
Yeah. Well, and like I said earlier, like, I don't think it's necessarily too rare or too unique. I think that's what happens, especially with
Yeah.
people in high school when they meet like-minded people, like they want to be around each other and lift each other up and inspire each other. And that's, that's been our relationship, the three of us, since then. And I mean, we're still doing it to this day. And it's amazing to have that kind of camaraderie, especially it's so ongoing and so long lasting. But yeah, I'm sure that, if you talk to people in Gothenburg, they say the same thing, or in Oslo, it is remarkable. It's a remarkable thing.
And so in the midst of all this, with kind of like, Agalloch being John and Sculpture being Don, how did you feel you developed? Did you kind of come in writing as well, or was that something that kind of developed as you were working on those projects with those guys?
Writing for like my own projects?
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of a hard question to answer. I mean, I had a death metal band or a grindcore band in high school. And we're pretty much just trying to be Napalm Death. I wrote a lot of the music for that. And then when I graduated high school and we split up, I started making 4-track recordings, just to try to figure out how to record, how to use a 4-track recorder to make these larger ideas. And that's when I started, especially Likely Sloth. And so then I had Sloth, and then I had this gothic noise project called Nothing for a long time. And so I started those things in like 94, 95. So when I got involved with Agalloch and Sculptured, I already had Sloth, I already had Nothing. Oh, okay. I had Caesarus and Nonus. I had a lot of the stuff that you can find on my Bandcamp from ages ago. But these were projects that were never going to be to the success level of an Agalloch or Sculptured. So it's just, I was always creating those things, but they were kind of in the background, I did a lot of shows under the name Nothing in the 90s, mostly in the Midwest. Did some on the West Coast. With varied success, but obviously just with that type of genre, you're not going to get the recognition that like an Agalloch does. But I've always been doing that stuff on the side. And now, because I've been doing it longer, I'm a lot better at it. Getting a lot more recognition for it. Like the last Snares record was my most successful solo record by far. And the one that I'm most proud of. But yeah, I mean, I've been doing it since like long before Agalloch and Sculptured. That's just kind of I'm kind of uncomfortable with the term musician because I have a hard time. Like, I'm not the best bass player in the world, I'm good, but I can't bring myself to sit and play for 7 hours a day. Yeah. It's not really how I want to create sound. I think about creating sound more than being a musician.
Okay.
Kevin Hufnagel is a musician. I just create sound. So whether that's through my noise equipment or through my bass, I create sound. And so because of that, I feel like those projects are just kind of bubbling under the surface of these more palatable projects.
Got it. Yeah. Well, it's, I get where that perspective comes from. I would say, like, just from, like I said, doing a deep listen to Sculptured and Agalloch, I mean, your bass is really good.
Thank you. I'm happy. Yeah, I'm proud of it.
Yeah, I just really, I do think that there is like a, like there is like, I don't know how to describe it, like, but yes, I think that's there is something there, like you.
Yeah. Excuse me. I don't want to misrepresent myself. Not like I'm being self-deprecating or saying I'm a shitty bass player. It's just I feel like I look at the process differently than like Don. I mean, Don is one of the most amazing, incredibly gifted musicians and guitarists, I mean, ever. Like, I believe, like, ever, really. And I know for a fact that's just because he spent the time to learn and practice his ass off. And I totally admire and respect that. And I'm very jealous of that fact, but that's just not how I work as an artist. So yeah, I can't play bass like Les Claypool, because of it. I just haven't put in the time. But I'm really happy with the work that I do, and I think I am a good bass player.
Yeah.
And I am proud of the work that I've done with Agalloch and Sculptured. It's just, I guess my point is that the stuff that I do on my own will never reach that kind of level, because just the inherent genre or style, it's just not as accessible. So it's always going to be bubbling under the surface, and people are going to be, I still hear people like, oh, I had no idea you did any electronic work. I'm like, yeah, it's like 30 years now I've been doing it almost. So.
And well, it's I like that you brought up Kevin Hufnagel too, because as a guitar player, I would kind of view myself in relation to him the same way you're kind of talking about, where it's I can see that he's put in way more practice time than I have, and as a result, yes, he's but I think I'm kind of coming to grips, as I get older, with how I developed as a musician and I think I kind of come a little bit from your perspective too, whereas I'm kind of more interested in the sound aspect. I'm like, yes, I would love to be able to pull off this really crazy shreddy stuff, but I can't. and I'm okay with it.
Yeah. I think for a long time, it was kind of something I was uncomfortable with, but I feel like in the last few years, I've become more and more comfortable with the fact, that's just not who I am, and that's not the player I am. And I'm okay with that. I think I'm a good player, but that's just not. It's not who I am.
Yeah.
And I'm fine with that. And with that realization, at least for me, now I really struggle with the terms talent and things like that. I think in the last couple of years, I've just been really uncomfortable using the term talent, because in my experience, it really comes down to dedication rather than some supreme divine gift that you're born with or something like that. That might enter into it a little bit. But I really think a lot of it has to do with mindset and dedication. And again, just knowing Don as well as I do, and knowing him as a teenager, knowing him now, he's a Kevin Hufnagel level guitarist, and he can just sit down and play anything. And I know for a fact when he was a teenager, he would come home from school and play for 6 hours a day. And that's that's just I never did that. I never did that.
Well, yeah, no, same here. And I guess the next thing I'd be curious about is just at what point did you, because it seems like, well, at least again, this is just from my experience of what I could see going, in the late 90s, 2000s. At what point did it become apparent that Agalloch was kind of I don't want to say the main thing, but Agalloch was, I feel like Agalloch kind of took off a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because when we first started doing this, we were doing Pill Folklore and Apollo N simultaneously. We kind of assumed that Sculptured would be the focus and the bigger one, because Sculptured already had an album out, already had a record deal. And Agalloch was still a baby, where Sculptured was more of a toddler at that point. So we just kind of assumed that Sculptured would take off more. And it was a little too challenging. I don't think people were ready for the brass. I don't think people were ready for the clean vocals. I think were pretty challenging at the time. So yeah, we just kind of assumed that Sculpture would be the one. And then when Pale Folklore came out, I can't really pinpoint like when we realized that Agalloch was taking off much more than Sculptured. But it had to have been shortly after Pale Folklore came out, because it did really well. The reviews are really great. People really loved it. And like I said, Sculptured just didn't do so well. And by the time the Mantle came out, then it was apparent. I mean, the Mantle just blew up for us. So at that point, it was like, yeah, there's no comparison between Agalloch and Sculptured. And then, Don put Sculptured on the back burner for a while, just so we could focus on Agalloch. So now it's been, 8 years between releases, sometimes things like that. But yeah, if I had to guess, I would say somewhere early 2000s, it was pretty apparent that Agalloch was going to do better.
Yeah. Okay.
And then we started getting like tour opportunities, and then
Yeah.
it's like, okay, well, let's tour with Agalloch, not with Sculptured. So
Okay. And yeah, that would probably be the next thing too. I mean, what was the touring like? I mean, did you because like I said, I saw you guys open for the Gathering in November's Doom.
okay, yeah.
In 2008? No, 2005,
No,
2000. I don't know.
somewhere around there.
Yeah, years escaping.
Yeah.
But yeah, like what was? Because I think there's always kind of like the weird conception of touring where you think, oh, okay, this touring is when you've made it.
Right.
But
yeah.
but and I know from the limited experience I had with KO in the early 2000s, like especially for bands that are doing more challenging music, that like there is you have to do it, but you're not actually still kind of coming home broke.
Yeah. Well, for us, it was a little bit different for us because by the time we played our first show, the Mantle was already out. And the Mantle, again, that was really big for us. So we already had a built-in audience. We already had 2 critically acclaimed records. The thing we didn't have is live experience. So it was hard for us in the beginning because we were green. We didn't know what we were doing. We'd all gigged before, like in our high school bands and stuff, but nothing serious like this. And we'd never toured before. Our very first tour was with Virgin Black and Antimatter on the West Coast. And it was miserable. I mean, we were just not very good back then. But like our reputation preceded us. So people were like, oh shit, I love the Mantle. I can't wait to see this band. And then it's like, oh, they're kind of rickety and they don't really know what they're doing. And so it's pretty rough for a long time. And because we had a record deal, we were signed with the End supported the tour. They drove our bus. I mean, our very first tour was in a bus that we didn't have to drive. We've never had to drive ourselves anywhere because we came at it from at a different time. We never had to do one of those tours where it's like, okay, who's driving? We're crashing on people's floors. Like we've never once toured like that because we just started playing so late in our career. But because the End was supporting everything, like we never made any money. I mean, it was all going back to the machine and back to the label. So as far as money goes, like we weren't seeing any money, but we never really had to suffer in the way that you hear about bands, like, oh, we toured for a month and we drove ourselves and had to like scrape for gas money. Like we never experienced that.
Okay. Wow. I'm jealous.
Yeah. Well, we just, we never even thought about playing live until after the Mantle came out. And so then it was kind of like, well, like I said, we have this built-in fan base already. And we had a label behind us that was kind of wanted us to be the next Opeth. And so they were just they were throwing money at tours and pushing us, and for better and for worse, but yeah. I mean, not to say that touring wasn't hard, but it's not to the level that you hear about so many bands that had to endure.
That's all. I mean, that's cool. It's cool for me to hear this experience, or to hear this, because um again, because I feel like you get a sense of a band sometimes just from the way they're talked about,
Sure.
without actually knowing them. And and Agalloch always had this kind of
Yeah.
aura about them. Just
Yeah.
from the way I heard people talk about them on message board, or talk about you on
Right.
message board.
Yeah.
Sorry. But so it's interesting for me to hear the story behind it, because, like, again, like, I love learning about this stuff. And
Yeah.
and and I could tell, obviously, from just from a listening standpoint, how you guys progressed through the different Agalloch albums. What was that process like for you? Like how, or the band, like, how did you guys perceive, like, what you were doing from album to album? Like, how did you want to approach things to say, like, okay, let's maybe push this a little bit, or not necessarily go in this direction? Or was it just kind of just natural, just like a natural evolution?
It's pretty natural. I mean, there were a couple of times where we would think, like, hey, we kind of want to try this, or we want to kind of go in this direction, or we're listening to a lot of Swans. We want to try some percussion that's reminiscent of the Swans, or, things like that, or some techniques, or, things that we want to, like, broaden our horizons with. But in that way, I feel like it was very natural too. It's just like, we're just trying to do what we wanted to do. And especially, when we recorded The Mantle, we thought it was suicide. We're like, nobody's going to like this. There's too much stuff going on. It's too all over the map. It's, we just threw the kitchen sink in there. It's like everything was happening. It's not focused enough. Nobody's going to like it. Well, of course, the opposite happened. And so then with Ashes, we're just like, we want to do what we didn't do on The Mantle. We want to do something more stripped down. We want to do something more direct. And by that time, we started playing shows. So then we're like, okay, we're going to think about how this translates live. And then from there, it was just always evolving. After Ashes, then we got Aesop as our drummer. And of course, that informed the songwriting. It informed, like, what we could do as a band by a lot. And so, yeah, it's just natural evolutions like that, and it's funny for me I don't listen to Agalloch, like, ever, but when I do hear it, it is remarkable to me to hear something like off of The Mantle, the difference between, like, that and Serpent or Marrow. We were constantly progressing and evolving, which I think is important. But yeah, I feel like it was all very natural.
Okay. And I promise this will be the last Agalloch question.
That's fine. I love talking about Agalloch.
Oh, okay. All right.
I'm a big Agalloch fan.
Okay. Well, I just kind of was curious, and like, what kind of led to you guys kind of putting it aside for a while, and and I guess, are there plans to revisit it?
The breakup was caused by a lot of factors.
I didn't want to call it a breakup.
Yeah, I mean, it was a breakup.
Okay.
It was caused by a lot of factors. Some I won't get into. Some I can explain a little bit. It's just, I guess the best way to say it is that it was really hard for the three of us, because when we started again, it was three of us in a bedroom. And then all of a sudden we find ourselves with a crew touring all over the place. There's a lot of money involved, a lot of people that are depending on us for incomes, a lot of opinions, a lot of people trying to get a piece of us. Like around the Marrow era, we were really big and we were playing really big shows, and there was a lot of stuff involved, and it just became unmanageable, and it became beyond what our friendships could endure. and what we could endure as a band. And it's just like the worst cliche VH1 type bullshit, and we just kind of imploded. And it got to a point where we were on tour, and it's like Don and I weren't really talking to John, and John wasn't really talking to us. And he had like people on tour with him that he would hang out with, and we'd have people on tour that we would hang out with, and we get together on stage, and it got tense and weird. And I think there was a lot of emotion involved, a lot of disillusion involved. I think we all kind of thought like, hey, if we get to this level, like everybody's going to be so happy. Yeah. And we were very grateful for what we were accomplishing, but at the same time, it was ruining friendships. It just became unmanageable. So we broke up, and that was devastating. That was one of the hardest things I've ever been through in my life. Agalloch has always been a huge part of my identity, a huge part of who I am, and it's my life's work. And so losing that was just, it was an identity crisis. It was a grieving process. I still grieve it to this day. But it took me a long time. It took many years of introspection and thinking about it. And Don and I have always been solid. We've always been best friends. But there was some stuff between John and I that took me a while to work through. And over the last 2 years, I'm happy to say that he and I have reconnected and we're friends again.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. And it's been great. Having him back in my life has been very positive for me. We've both learned a lot since all that happened. Obviously it's been 6 years or whatever. We've both grown a lot. We've both changed a lot. And now the three of us can hang out in a room together and be friends again. So that's what we're focused on right now, is
that's perfect.
Repairing friendships, catching up with each other. Like when I played that show in New Hampshire that you saw, I was on my way to the venue and John texted and he's like, man, I'm stoked you're playing in New Hampshire. Like, have a good show tonight. So like, that was job number one, is repairing that type of shit. As far as like down the road, I mean, I never say never, but at this point it's not really on our radar to do that.
Makes sense.
But yeah, it's been great. Now the three of us can go out and have beers together and nerd out about finished death metal demos. And that's the most important part to me. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Again, what you say kind of resonates with me a little bit, because obviously not that KO ever broke up or anything like that, but the kind of, or not that we were ever at that level anyway, but the way you kind of describe it is kind of the way I felt in 2006 when I left KO.
Yeah.
Because it was kind of the thing where your band identity kind of, again, there's the friendship, me and Toby have been friends for over 30 years, and then you have your band identity and you have your friendship, and sometimes the two can grate at each other. And I think like that was my concern, was like, I don't want to, how I'm feeling about the band musically, and what's going on, how the tour is happening, how everything is happening. I don't want that to destroy the friendship,
Yeah.
And so it seemed to me that like that was the best way to do it, was to leave.
And
I because I knew he'd be okay.
Right.
I knew the records were going to be great no matter what.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's something, again, it's not something a lot of people talk about, which is like when you start a band.
Yeah.
It's one thing if you're in a band with like hired guns or people you just kind of meet in that process, whereas opposed to when you have it's like real deep connection, real deep friendship, like it can get messy.
Well, and you're right. I mean, it's something that not a lot of people talk about. And it's something that never occurred to me, honestly. I mean, the three of us had never had problems.
Yeah.
And we're all best friends. And we'd hang out like almost every day when we could. So why would like touring the world in front of like thousands of fans and making money doing what you love, like why would that be an issue? It seems so stupid. But it's just, there's a lot of, with great power comes great responsibility. And that's, and that's what happened. And I think there again, that's a pretty common thing.
So, in the wake of all that, like how long is it for you? Like, okay, well, I got to get back to work and get stuff out there. And was there kind of a period where you're like, I just don't want to think about music for a while? And then
no, not at all. No. I mean, literally, I would say the next day. That's funny. Toby just texted me right now. That's funny. Yeah. Anyway. No, so I think Agalloch broke up one day, and the next day, Don and Aesop and I were texting, what are we doing now? Like, because we were not done playing together. Like, we still wanted to play together. So then, I'd say within a week of Agalloch breaking up, we had Karada ready to go. And then we did the one Karada record together. And that was a great experience. Are you familiar with that record?
I'm not actually.
Okay. Yeah. It's do you know Giant Squid?
Yes.
Okay. So it's AJ from Giant Squid, the singer and guitarist. And so it was Don, Aesop, and I from Agalloch. We got AJ to come on board, and we formed this band Karada. We put out one record on Prophecy. And that was a great experience. But I kind of feel like we all wanted different things. And so we did the one record and just kind of fizzled out, but yeah, there was no stopping. I don't think I've ever had a period in my life where I just stopped. I think now I'm trying to work towards a period where I'm doing less.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think I've ever just like stopped. And definitely not then. Like, we were just like, we still wanted to play shows. We still wanted to tour, so yeah, we did that for like 2 years or so. I guess after that, there was a little period of time where I wasn't doing quite as much stuff. But in that time I was writing the Snares record, the last one, and Dolvin. Yeah, I'm always doing something. And then I started my podcast and, t-shirt company and all that stuff.
That was actually going to be my next segue. But before that, I just want to say, like, so I will say, like, going into this interview, I was extremely nervous about. I'm like, I really hope I don't come off sounding like an idiot who doesn't know all of your stuff.
No, unexpected. Yeah,
imposter syndrome is something very prevalent for me. So I was like, oh no, sorry, I don't know that record.
No, I don't expect people to know everything that I've done. It's too much. It's too much.
But yeah, I was gonna say too. Yeah, when did the idea for the podcast come up then?
I'm really bad with years and time frames at this point in my life, but
that's okay. General is fine.
Yeah, I think if I were to guess, I'd be 5 years ago.
Okay.
And I have a group of friends, and we get together, I'd say once a month when we can, and we just bring records. Like, this is what I've been listening to. I think you should hear this too, blah, blah. We bring records and we share music, but we do it blindly because it was my idea. I was like, if you bring a record and put it on and tell me it's Fish, I'm going to hate it before it's even on the record player. So we don't tell anybody. And it's not necessarily like a trivia situation. It's more like just a blank canvas situation. No preconceived notions. And it was a really great way to share music and discover new things. And it was a lot of fun. Around the same time, I got deeply into podcasts like Mark Maron, WTF. And at the time, Aesop had a podcast called Death Metal Dads that I was really into. And I was like, this would be really cool for a podcast. Like, people playing music for each other, but not saying what it is, and people can discover music. So one day I was driving into Portland and I was like, I've got the gear to do it. I know the people that could come over and we could do this. And so I'm going to try it and see how it goes. And I'm on a break now. I think the last episode was with Tanner, like in March.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, aside from the break, I've been doing it for like 5 years. Only maybe 50 episodes or so.
Yeah.
But it was cool. It was a lot of fun. I'm feeling a little bit less motivated to do it now because, I'm trying to do less with my life. Also, I've found it, I was kind of stagnating a bit, in my opinion. And there's so many other podcasts too that I'm also just like, I don't know. Like when I first started it, I was like, oh, there's not too many other music podcasts out there that are talking about metal and extreme metal and things like that. And then Radical Research showed up and just kind of fucked me over, like, fuck those guys. So yeah.
Just to interrupt. I'm actually interviewing Hunter later on today, so I'll make sure to
really?
tell him. Yeah. And I just interviewed Jeff too, so like I'm good.
Well, please tell Hunter, fuck you.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt anyway.
Yeah, no, I love Jeff and Hunter. Jeff and I have been friends since the 90s. Hunter's a relatively new friend, but I think people know, but he's the new drummer for Sculptured.
Yep. Yeah.
So yeah, and they're both adorable, incredibly wise, incredibly interesting people. I love them both dearly. But it's not like they were doing what I did, but I also kind of feel like they took the wind out of my sails a little bit with the podcast. So anyway, I'm on a break right now.
Okay.
It's kind of ironic because right before the break, like I got my first sponsor, like I was making money from the podcast. I had a few like really notable people agree to do it that probably would have been really great. I just wasn't really feeling it. And I didn't want to do it half-assed. And so I'm like,
fair.
I do believe that I'll come back at some point. I just needed a break. So we'll see.
I, as someone whose podcast has been around since 2014, but I've barely gotten to 63 episodes or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I sympathize so much or empathize with that because it's tough, and I will say from a personal perspective, it took me a little bit to listen to both your podcast and Radical Research because I was like, this part of me was like, I'm going to listen to it and it's going to be so much better than mine. And I'm going to feel like a jerk and I don't want to do it anymore. So like, I was always nervous about doing it because I'm like, oh, these guys are probably way more interesting than I am. And have, even though like ostensibly like our podcasts are all very different in their own way.
Yes,
again,
agreed.
know,
yeah.
But that's okay. But well, cool. I mean, I'm glad to hear, I enjoy hearing about how that all came together because I think that's really cool.
Yeah, no, and I really enjoyed it. And like I said, I'll probably come back at some point, but just on a hiatus for a while.
Yeah. And and I'm also jealous you got Tanner before I did.
Yeah, well, actually, Tanner was one of my first thoughts because Tanner and I have been so close for so long. And he is one of my favorite people on the planet. And so when I first had this idea, I was like, oh my God, I really need to get Tanner. But excuse me, when I first started, it was pre-pandemic. And I was only doing it when people were at my house. I wasn't doing anything remotely at all. So I wasn't really sure how to manage that. It's really easy to do when people are here, but it's really hard to do this where you're both sharing music and have it sound good and doing it remotely. It's really difficult. So I had to change the format a little bit, and that kind of like bummed me out a bit. But Yeah, getting Tanner was great. I had Toby and Tanner this year.
Yeah.
And both of the, I mean, again, I love both those people so much and admire both of them so much. But yeah, Tanner he was like at the top of my list. I just didn't know how to do it remotely.
Yeah.
And we were lucky there pre-pandemic. We were seeing each other like every 6 months or so. But once I finally figured out how to do this remotely a little bit better, then I got him on. But yeah, he's amazing. Have you seen him lately?
Yeah. We hung out. So we had a Concilium gig in Rhode Island.
Yeah, he sent me a photo from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And which is really great because Toby came to that show.
Yeah.
And so I got to see Tanner. I told Tanner, he's like, like that smile, like,
yeah,
Toby, I can meet Toby finally.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because he texted me a photo of him with Toby.
Yeah.
And I was like, what the fuck? That's so crazy.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. And then it was just because he just moved here. So like I've been telling him, like I've been keeping tabs on like places that I'm like, hey, well, I know you're into like French pastries. Let's go get some French pastries. And and so yeah, we took them out for lunch on the Sunday after that gig, and we went to a French patisserie, and then
that's awesome.
And then went to got lunch together. It was awesome. I love seeing Massachusetts through his eyes, because to me it's all like
right.
I'm like, I've been here for 20 years or whatever.
Yeah.
And so he's still kind of fresh new, and he's like,
totally,
wow. Such a good dude.
Yeah, he's great. I'm jealous because for so many years he's like, I'm probably gonna end up in the Northwest. I'm like, yeah, I know you are. And he's like, I'll probably end up in Seattle or Washington somewhere. I'm like, yep, I know that's gonna happen. And then he's like, Boston. I'm like, wait, that's totally the wrong direction. What are you talking about?
Yeah. Well, sorry about that.
Yeah, I'll forgive you. It's fine. And Toby too. Toby's been like, oh, West Coast maybe. I'm like, yeah, man, come on out.
Well, yeah, and then Ron was out in the West Coast for a while.
I know, and he just left me. Like, what the fuck? Yeah, he texted me like a month ago or so, and he's like, hey, I'm moving back. Like, do you want to do one last improv show with me? And I was like, wait, like, yes, of course, but what the fuck, dude?
Everyone's leaving me.
Yeah, everyone's leaving me. No, Ron is another guy. I just love that guy too. We had so much fun together, and we would do these improv shows together. I think we did 3 or 4 of them, and it's just completely improv. But it's just so much fun just to spread my wings like that and broaden my horizons with him. And yeah, it's just great dude.
Well, and I loved the recording you have on your Bandcamp of you guys. Like,
thank you. That was great.
I was like listening to that, and I was like, I mean, I love Ron too. Like, I mean, I couldn't pick a better guitar player to take my place in Kyoto.
Yeah.
But I love Ron, and I just was like listening to like. I think like, I don't know, maybe it's just the way I am older, but I feel like I've listening to the Moonbladder and that kind of stuff, like that kind of stuff resonates a little bit more with me maybe than like, say, that Agalloch or the Sculptured stuff, just because I don't know, it's just where my mindset is at these days. So like, yeah, listening to what you and Ron did together, I was like, this is really beautiful, this is really cool. And
that was fun. Yeah. This last show that we played right before he moved back, we show up and he's like, I brought my bass. I was like, okay, cool. So he played bass, and I was like, this is different, but yeah, it was great.
Yeah, I've been seeing his bass playing videos on Instagram.
Oh yeah,
get the job.
Glass jaw.
Yeah, the glass jaw. Man, well, actually, one question I was kind of curious about the podcast too. Well, where does the name I Hate Music come from?
That's a great question. There is a band from Ohio called Fossil Fuel, and they had a song called I Hate Music. And the chorus is something like, I hate music, it's full of fuck, and if you listen to it, it'll make you dumb. And I was just like, it just spoke to me. I'm like, that's what I'm going to name my podcast. I hate music.
I kind of agree with the sentiment of that song too.
Yeah. Well, and it was interesting because initially it was just like based off of this song that I love. And it's just kind of, obviously it's ironic and it's a little bit funny or whatever. But then once I started doing the episodes more and more, then I started to ask people at the end, like, why do you hate music? And it really took people off guard because obviously none of us hate music, but it was starting to make people think about it in a different way. Like, why do you hate music? And I think, I'm trying to remember who it was I asked. God, it's escaping from me. I want to say it was Dan Swano, but I don't think it was. Anyway, I guess it doesn't really matter. But someone said to me, I hate music because it consumes all my thoughts. It's all I care about. It's all I've ever done. It's made me broke. It's cost me relationships. It's cost me sanity. And I was like, this is brilliant. Like, this is exactly what I wanted to get to. I wanted to look at that question in like a different way. And I think a lot of people, like, obviously we're all celebrating music and we're celebrating the amazing things that it's done for us in our lifetimes. But there's some real downsides with like obsession and, even like neglecting family. I mean, it can manifest in so many different ways. And I think that's a really interesting conversation to have. So, God damn it, I can't remember who that was, but I was like, yes, like this is the conversations that I want to have about this, is the problems that can arise with it too.
Yeah. And yeah, now you got me thinking about that now too. I'm like, oh geez, that does resonate with me too.
Yeah. Well, I think most people that are, I would say it's true for probably most of the people we know that are, making this sort of music or in these type of scenes. It's obviously more than just a hobby. It's so much more. Yeah. So and that can come with problems.
Yeah. Yep. Well, not to end on a downer note. Although that's cool too. I guess just two quick questions for you. One is, and I asked this to Jeff Wagner too, and the way he kind of talked about this reminded me of me too. Are there any new bands you like? Or anything on your radar that's like new? Because like I feel like a lot of us kind of get, as we get older too, just kind of like fall back on the old stuff.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I kind of live in two worlds there. I understand why people write off newer music, and I understand why people, focus on the bands they've loved for 20, 30 years. I understand why that happens, but I don't agree with it. And I don't think it's a good excuse. I think I'm trying to express this the best way I can. I'm really struggling with people my age, how they are very complacent with ignorance, complacent with reveling in nostalgia, and just being complacent. Mm-hmm. So having said that, I try to keep up with new metal. Not new metal, but but newer metal. I try to keep up with it. But it's obviously overwhelming and there's a lot of shit out there. The thing that I run up against, which everybody else runs up against too, is it's hard to find something that speaks to you when you've been listening to extreme metal for 30 some years. Having said that, I really like what Blood Incantation is doing. I've been friends with them forever too, so maybe I'm biased. As far as like metal goes, it's pretty hard for me to get excited about stuff. I mean, I'll listen to it and like it and be like, yeah, this is a great band, but I'm not necessarily running out and buying the records. Imperial Triumphant, I like a lot. Yeah, as far as like metal stuff, it's harder for me.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be metal too. I mean, because I find I listen to metal not less and less, but like, the world gets bigger, and so
Yeah,
you transcend
yeah.
the genres you usually stick to.
I still listen to a lot of metal, like quite a bit of metal. The new Immolation is great. Really digging that. I've been listening to a lot of electronic music in the last couple of years, and I don't mean like EDM or IDM or any of that stuff. More like Adult or Thief. Thief is one of my absolute favorite fucking bands. They're like the best thing ever, and I'm obsessed with that band. But I'm that type of stuff is resonating with me more. Pharmacon, listening to a lot of hip hop lately. Run the Jewels, Clipping is like my favorite fucking band in the world. Listening to a lot of like old school hip hop stuff too. Listening to, honestly, lots of hip hop lately. Even stuff like Saweetie and Megan Thee Stallion. I love that like really modern, super polished, but just like fucking badass, empowering. I've been really digging that stuff. There is a metal band from Denver called Black Curse that's really cool.
Oh, cool.
The last KO Dot record.
Yeah, bullshit.
No, I love that one. I love that one. It's hard to think of all this stuff off the top of my head, but I'd also say Anephrines. It's another good one, black metal. But more and more electronic, and like I said, lots of hip hop stuff lately.
That's cool. No, that's awesome. I mean, I kind of went through like, I think I finally understood hip hop, or at least it started to speak to me more when I like had to actually produce a hip hop track. And, and like it was for a wrestler, and he's like, I really want he's like, it really needs, I forget the way he put it. He's like, it needs to like swing or groove, or he had some kind of way of describing how the drums and the bass should be. And I'm like, and I'm like, I'm Googling like the whitest white boy thing ever. How do you make your hip hop tracks bounce or whatever? And just learning about like about what learning about what went into like the older stuff as opposed to the newer stuff, and watching like to see how producers do their shit. It's just like it's amazing to me. And I love learning about that because it's just like it's a whole other world that I never really.
The whole other world, yeah. And that's the thing, and I think it's I think traditionally people that are into what we're into, like typically poo-poo that stuff, or at least they used to more and more. I feel like that's changing, but still, I think electronic music is widely misunderstood in the circles that we run in. Whether that be like dance music or hip hop or noise or whatever. But it's fascinating, and like I mean, I'm pretty picky with my hip hop. I like it more rough. I like the horrorcore stuff, like horror and again clipping. Holy shit, they're so damn good. But those those are two noise guys. Like there's three guys in clipping, and two of them are power electronic artists. And then the third is this amazing rapper. I mean, and like you can't get cooler than that, and it's fucking amazing. And the stuff that they do with like modular synths and like live, they're like breaking glass and miking it. And it's like the coolest, like most accessible, like badass hip hop. It's just, oh, and they sample people like Slogan and other power electronics artists, and it's amazing. Anyway, I get really excited about clipping.
No, but, that's kind of why I asked the question, is because I think, to me, when someone starts telling me about a project or a band they're into, like with that level of excitement, I'm like, shit, I need to be checking them out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I love that.
Yeah, if you come away with anything from this podcast, listen to Clipping and Thief.
Okay, well, I'm going to research them.
And Thief is on Prophecy, so label
okay.
mates.
Yeah. Okay, good to know. Well, seriously, Jason, thank you, man. This is
thank you, man.
As someone who has been woefully ignorant of a lot of the stuff you've done over the last 20 years, and just like I said, just revisiting and learning and trying to be better about it, and just recognizing like just how much cool shit you've been involved in, and and I love the stuff that I was bummed I missed your actual set at the New Hampshire thing.
Yeah.
But aside from that, like the records that I bought from you, and just like going through your Bandcamp, just saying, okay, I'm gonna check out the Self Spiller thing, and like just hearing the different stuff you've been up to, it's really, really cool and inspiring.
Thank you.
So
thank you.
So yeah, thank you. I really appreciate this. And yeah.
Well, thanks for having me on. And on a personal note, it's been nice to get to know you a little bit better. We haven't really talked much.
No.
So yeah.
Yeah, I always kind of feel like I kind of look at it like Toby's up here, and I'm kind of just like I'm like the low man on the totem pole, really. It's tough for me to conceptualize things, because just because of what I actually contributed to those records is very small in my head.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So like I feel kind of weird about it sometimes, where I'm just like, yes, I was part of those records, they're cool and I love them, but I never necessarily feel like I contributed much to them. So like so like if people are complimenting them, I'm like, thanks, you're really mainly complimenting Toby. and that's cool. Like I have no problem with that, because I think he's a genius. But like, I have this weird it's something I talk about in therapy all the time.
I get that. I mean? Yeah. Well, I kind of got that sense, because when I saw you in New Hampshire, you were obviously walking towards me to introduce yourself. And I was like, oh, Greg. And you're like, oh.
What, you know me? No one knows me.
No, I know you.
But yeah, no, it's been really great getting to know you better. And yeah, man, let's talk more, keep me in the loop with what you're doing.
For sure.
I'll be totally psyched to hear the stuff you're up to. And yeah.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks again for the podcast. I appreciate it.
pride. Hold my liver, feel its confidence. Touch my lungs, feel their humidity. Feel its pride. Caress my bowels, and feel its confidence. Touch my lungs, feel their dignity. Feel their humility. Caress my bowels, and feed their dignity. Feed their dignity. Upon having my teeth and eyes removed, upon having my hopes and dreams removed, upon castrating and ravaging the stench of time. Dread and regret the snares of sixes.